The summer of 1914 did not open with the gentle golden sunlight of a peaceful Europe, but with the gunshots at Sarajevo and a storm of war that spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Within weeks, a chain of declarations of war pulled the entire continent into the whirlwind of World War I. When Germany declared war on Russia and then invaded Belgium in order to strike at France, Europe found itself suffocating under the weight of a conflict many believed would end in a few months, but instead dragged on for 4 years and consumed tens of millions of lives. While Germany set its Schlieffen Plan in motion, a lightning offensive through Belgium intended to crush Paris, France entered the war with a very different plan. Plan 17, a bold, high-spirited strategy fueled more by national emotion than military realism. Under this plan, the French army would launch multiple offensives toward Alsace-Lorraine, the territory seized by Germany after France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. To the French, Alsace was not just land, it was a wound to national honor. On every map, Alsace-Lorraine looked like a severed limb, and the War of 1914 offered the first chance in more than 40 years to reclaim it. This spirit of revenge swept across France. Propaganda posters, fiery speeches, and the bitter memory of 1871 stirred an overwhelming desire to retake Alsace. The French government believed that a direct offensive into the region would not only restore national pride, but also force German troops in the south to divert away from the main Western Front, easing the pressure on Paris. But war rarely respects plans drawn confidently in red ink. The Germans were well prepared. They understood the strategic and symbolic importance of Alsace, and they fortified the region heavily, especially around Mulhouse, the key industrial city that served as the gateway to the Rhine Valley. Mulhouse was not only a major industrial hub, but also a crucial railway node linking German military centers and allowing rapid troop deployment. On August 7, 1914, just 6 days after Germany declared war on France, the French First Army under General Auguste Dubay and the separate Alsace Force under General Louis Bonneau were ordered to march into Alsace. This became one of the very first Allied offensives of the entire war. Dressed in their traditional blue coats and red trousers, burning with anger over their lost territory, the French troops advanced as if they were carrying the honor of the whole nation on their shoulders. The offensive opened on a wave of enthusiasm. Many Alsatians, French in heritage, lined the roads to welcome the soldiers. Some villagers even raised the tricolor flag once more, despite the danger. The French were buoyed by pride and convinced that this campaign marked the beginning of a triumphant return. But the battlefield is always the harshest teacher. On August 8th, French forces pushed German units out of Altkirch, a small but emotionally significant victory. The French entered the town to loud cheers, taking it as proof that Germany would not hold Alsace against their determined assault. The next objective was Mulhouse, Germany's industrial stronghold and the key to the region. On August 9th, the French army marched into Mulhouse with almost no resistance. Alsatians hung French flags and greeted the troops as liberators. France believed this victory marked the start of a successful campaign to reclaim the whole of Alsace before Germany could respond. But it was the calm before the storm. Germany had not abandoned Mulhouse. They had simply stepped back to reorganize. The German High Command quickly rushed units from the 7th Army, along with reinforcements from Freiburg and Upper Rhine, into Alsace at extraordinary speed. Germany understood that to hold the southern front and maintain strategic superiority, Mulhouse had to be defended at all costs. Meanwhile, France committed a fatal error. They believed Germany was focusing all strength in the north, toward Belgium and Lorraine, and therefore underestimated the likelihood of a powerful German counterattack in Alsace. General Bonneau, cautious by nature, repeatedly requested reinforcements. But the French High Command refused, insisting that the Alsace campaign was secondary to the Northern Front. This overconfidence pushed the French into a crisis they did not expect. As Germany concentrated reinforcements near Mulhouse, the situation changed rapidly. Railway lines from Freiburg delivered wave after wave of well-trained troops. German infantry, heavy artillery, and cavalry massed in the forests and hills to the east, calmly preparing for a large-scale counteroffensive. On August 10th, French troops in Mulhouse began feeling the pressure. Skirmishes erupted along the Ill River. Scouts reported large German troop concentrations, but French command refused to believe that a major attack was imminent. They still saw the capture of Mulhouse as an easy victory and assumed Germany lacked the strength for a full-scale counterstrike. In reality, one of the fastest and fiercest German counterattacks of the early war was quietly taking shape. And within days, Mulhouse would become a bloody battlefield, where France's dream of reclaiming Alsace would be shattered under the disciplined power of the German army. On August 10, 1914, while the French still believed they held Mulhouse firmly in their grasp, the Germans had already prepared a counterblow powerful enough to erase every advantage France had gained. The German 7th Army, under General Josias von Heeringen, was ordered not only to retake Mulhouse, but to drive the French completely out of Alsace. Germany understood better than anyone the symbolic weight Mulhouse carried for the French nation, and they had no intention of allowing such a symbolic victory to stand for more than a few days. At dawn on August 11th, military trains from Freiburg, Donaueschingen, and Offenburg poured thousands of German troops into assembly areas east of the Rhine. Infantry, cavalry, and artillery regiments deployed in formations that had been carefully planned long before. The Germans were not preparing for a rushed attack, but for a deliberate, methodical, and devastating counteroffensive designed to crush the inexperienced French forces holding Mulhouse. On the French side, General Louis Bonneau, who had taken Mulhouse only days earlier, began to realize that the situation was far more complex than the French High Command had assumed. Reconnaissance reports arrived one after another, warning that German troop numbers were increasing rapidly. Unusual activity along the railways and in the Black Forest indicated that Germany was preparing a major strike. Yet Bonneau received no reinforcements, no additional artillery, and no reserves. He was ordered to hold Mulhouse at all costs, despite commanding only a few divisions, far too few to withstand a full German counterattack. By midday on August 12th, the first thunder of artillery boomed across the front. The Germans opened the battle with a massive, concentrated bombardment on French defensive positions east and southeast of Mulhouse. The accuracy of the German fire, striking rail bridges, ammunition depots, and communication lines, proved how thoroughly they had prepared. Moments later, German regiments advanced in layered formations, supported closely by field artillery. In many sectors, the German infantry moved so swiftly that French troops had no time to establish proper defensive lines. The French, still wearing their traditional bright red trousers, highly visible on a modern battlefield, were cut down in large numbers. German guns continued raining shells onto French assembly points, breaking several units before they could even engage the enemy. To the south, near Alsace and Sausheim, German forces swept French regiments out of their positions within hours. The seamless coordination between German infantry and artillery left the French with virtually no chance of mounting a structured counterattack. French troops around Mulhouse were scattered, poorly coordinated, and shaken by the realization that the enemy held overwhelming numerical superiority. General Bonneau attempted to restore order, instructing his regiments to fall back to defensive lines closer to Mulhouse, but the Germans gave them no breathing room. The 7th Army pushed toward the city from the east and northeast, threatening to encircle the French entirely. Seeing the danger, Bonneau was forced into a grim decision. He had to retreat from Mulhouse or risk the annihilation of his entire force. By the afternoon of August 12th, the French began a disciplined withdrawal, struggling to maintain cohesion while German troops pressed them relentlessly. Major roads leading out of Mulhouse soon became clogged with infantry, cavalry, wagons, wounded men, and supply columns. In the confusion, several French units were cut off and had to escape by narrow rural paths, using anything they could to delay the German pursuers. Nightfall brought the inevitable. German troops marched into Mulhouse for the second time in just 3 days. The city, which had only recently raised the French tricolor, was once again forced to hoist the German flag. Many Alsatians who had openly welcomed the French were arrested or fled into hiding. German wagons rolled across the cobbled streets, signaling the swift and decisive restoration of German control. The collapse of the French position hit even harder when news reached Paris. The French High Command claimed that Bonneau had been overly cautious and unfit to hold Mulhouse. He was immediately relieved of duty and replaced by General Paul Pau, who was expected to oversee a more aggressive attempt to retake the city. But the problem was not leadership. The problem was that France had committed too few troops to too large an objective. Meanwhile, German morale soared. Retaking Mulhouse was not just a tactical victory, it was a major psychological triumph. Germany had proven that even while concentrating the bulk of its forces on the Western Front, it could still defend Alsace-Lorraine with disciplined, well-organized troops. This stabilized their southern flank and secured vital supply routes along the border. Yet the battle for Mulhouse was far from over. General Paul Pau, now commanding French forces in Alsace, refused to let the setback derail France's strategic goals under Plan 17. He immediately began regrouping divisions, strengthening logistics, and preparing for a new offensive. Larger, more coordinated, and more ambitious. Pau believed that with proper preparation and reinforcements, France could still drive the Germans out of Mulhouse once more. Both sides understood that the struggle for Alsace was not finished. Germany sought to hold Mulhouse and lock down the southern gateway, while France viewed the city as a national symbol that could not be surrendered. Mulhouse was never merely an industrial town. It had become the stage upon which two national wills collided with brutal force in the chaotic opening days of World War I. After the bitter defeat at Mulhouse on August 12, 1914, the French High Command realized that the Alsace campaign could not rely solely on patriotic zeal and the romantic spirit of Plan 17. Retaking Mulhouse would require a coordinated operation, one with larger forces, stronger artillery, and a seasoned commander. Thus, General Paul Pau, one of France's most experienced officers, was appointed to rebuild the entire campaign and launch a second offensive toward Mulhouse. General Pau quickly recognized that General Bonneau's greatest mistake had not been caution, but being forced to hold a major strategic objective with a force far too small. He immediately began a total reorganization, calling up reserve divisions, reinforcing the army with heavy artillery, and establishing a tighter logistical network. Pau understood that victory in the second attempt to take Mulhouse would be possible only if he secured overwhelming superiority at every stage. On August 14th, the first reorganized French units began marching eastward. This time, they advanced in long, disciplined columns, carrying ample ammunition, rations, and logistical support. Mountain roads and forest paths along the Vosges filled with the footsteps of tens of thousands of soldiers. Songs still echoed through the ranks, but they were no longer the cheerful chorus of early August. This time, determination, solemn resolve, and the hunger for retribution hung heavily in the air. The Germans, meanwhile, did not remain idle. After retaking Mulhouse, they immediately strengthened their defensive network around the city. German regiments established new lines in the villages of Zillesheim, Flaxlanden, and Lutterbach. They built fresh fortifications and positioned field artillery in forests and on key heights. The Germans knew the French would return, and they intended to hold Mulhouse at all costs. To them, defending Alsace-Lorraine meant defending the honor of the empire, a symbol even more sacred than its strategic value. On August 15th, a major clash erupted near Cernay, a crucial gateway to Mulhouse from the west. French artillery opened the battle with a heavy bombardment, targeting German positions on the low hills. French infantry advanced in waves, firing as they moved and using natural trenches and field embankments for cover. German Maxim guns answered with brutal efficiency, sending streams of fire that cut down many of the first French waves. But unlike the first offensive, French artillery now adjusted rapidly, suppressing the German machine guns with far greater accuracy. By late afternoon, the Germans were forced to withdraw from Cernay, leaving behind the wounded and the dead scattered across trampled fields. The victory at Cernay opened a critical tactical corridor, allowing the French to push closer to Mulhouse. On August 16th, General Pau launched a full-scale assault along the entire front. The French advanced in three main columns, one toward Ilfurth, one through Dornach, and the main force against Lutterbach, the direct gateway into Mulhouse. This second offensive carried none of the romantic fervor of early August. It was calculated, disciplined, and ferocious, an operation in which artillery played the decisive role. At Dornach, the fighting raged for hours. German troops turned every house and stone wall into a strong point. French riflemen had to battle street by street, meter by meter, through narrow lanes where machine gun fire hammered walls like relentless steel hammers. Only by midday did French heavy artillery finally silence the German strongholds, forcing them back toward central Mulhouse. The Ilfrith column encountered equally fierce resistance. German shells churned open fields into muddy craters, slowing the French advance. But sheer weight of numbers eventually allowed the French to seize key positions and push the Germans northward. As the sun dipped behind the Vosges, Mulhouse appeared once again before the French, second time in a single week. There were no cheers this time. The soldiers knew German forces were still inside the city. But General Pau ordered them forward, determined not to repeat the previous failure. On August 17th, after hours of fighting, from factory districts to old stone neighborhoods, from the central square to the railway station, the French finally expelled the German forces from Mulhouse. The tricolor rose over the city once more. The people of Alsace stepped into the streets again, this time with tears, not of pure joy, but of fear that they might be abandoned once more if the war shifted again. Yet General Pau quickly grasped a grim reality. This victory was only temporary. Reconnaissance reports warned that Germany was massing forces on a scale even greater than before, bringing fresh divisions from Freiburg and Colmar. A new German counteroffensive could erupt at any moment, bigger than the first, potentially unstoppable. Worse still, devastating news arrived from the northern front. German forces had smashed through Belgium and were now approaching the French border. The situation in Lorraine and the Ardennes was rapidly deteriorating. The French High Command had no choice but to make a painful decision: withdraw troops from Alsace to rescue the collapsing main front. On August 18, 1914, just as French forces were stabilizing their positions in Mulhouse after their hard-fought recapture, the heavy clouds of impending disaster were already gathering over Alsace. General Paul Pau was preparing to strengthen the defensive lines around the city when dire news arrived from Paris. The northern front was collapsing by the hour. German forces had smashed the French in Lorraine and were advancing through Belgium with terrifying speed. The French government and High Command were forced to prioritize saving the main front. To do that, they had to withdraw troops from secondary operations, Mulhouse included. France had retaken the city only a day earlier, paying for it with the blood of thousands. And now they were being asked to consider abandoning that victory. General Pau understood better than anyone that if he tried to hold Mulhouse with his thin, overstretched forces, his entire corps risked being surrounded and annihilated. But withdrawing meant admitting defeat, admitting that Plan 17, the pride of France, had misread the reality of modern war from the very first day. While the French debated, the Germans acted. The German 7th Army received orders from Berlin to retake Mulhouse as quickly as possible and ensure that no part of Alsace-Lorraine remained in enemy hands, not even briefly. Reinforcements poured in from the Black Forest and industrial centers east of the Rhine. Fresh regiments were raised, heavy artillery was brought forward, and the strategic rail line from Freiburg ran at full capacity, delivering thousands of troops to the front. On August 19th, French scouts reported that at least 3 German divisions were rapidly advancing toward Mulhouse, supported by a tightly coordinated artillery force. The Germans intended to strike directly at the newly formed French defensive lines along Dornach and Lutherbach. One look at the map made their intention unmistakable. This was no probing attack. They meant to retake Mulhouse with a lightning blow, giving the French no chance to hold even a single extra day. General Pau convened an emergency meeting with his divisional commanders. Heated debates erupted. Should they retreat to save the army or hold the city to preserve the honor of France? Reality made the decision for them. They would withdraw, orderly, deliberately, to preserve their forces for the decisive battles unfolding in the north. Orders moved down the chain of command, from brigades to regiments to companies. French soldiers, many of whom had only hung the tricolor on Mulhouse's streets less than 48 hours earlier, now prepared to leave the city in silence. But withdrawing would not be easy. At dawn on August 20th, German artillery began hammering French positions. Shells exploded across the eastern districts of the city, shaking buildings to their foundations. German infantry advanced in open, coordinated formations, firing as they moved to seize the high ground. The French were forced into a fighting retreat, holding the line just long enough to keep their formation intact. At Dornach, the fighting reached its most violent pitch. French troops entrenched themselves in factories and residential blocks, resisting desperately against the growing pressure. German machine guns raked the streets, and their artillery fired point-blank into French strongpoints. Several French units were cut off, forced to escape through side streets to avoid encirclement. Yet the French morale held. Every hour they held, Dornach bought precious time for the northern units to withdraw safely. Outside Mulhouse, French columns streamed westward through the narrow valleys leading into the Vosges. Dirt roads, churned by artillery caissons, collapsed into deep mud. Many soldiers discarded heavy equipment to move faster. Long lines of wounded stretched for miles, supported by comrades as artillery thundered behind them. By late afternoon on August 20th, Mulhouse fell once again into German hands. It was the second time in just 12 days that the city had changed sides. A stark symbol of how fierce and unstable the fighting in Alsace had become in the opening weeks of the Great War. As German troops marched back into the city, they found hastily torn French flags, streets scarred by battle, and Alsatian civilians watching silently, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. General Pau, upon hearing that Mulhouse had been lost again, did not blame his soldiers. They had fought with everything they had, twice driving out German forces and retaking the city under brutal conditions. But history was not on their side. The Northern Front was disintegrating too quickly, forcing France to redirect every available unit to halt Germany's thunderous advance toward Paris. The withdrawal from Mulhouse was more than a tactical setback. It was a heavy blow to French morale. Plan 17, drawn with such pride and confidence, had collided with the harsh reality of modern warfare and shattered within days. Soldiers who dreamed of liberating Alsace were now learning that this war would allow no romantic illusions. Victory would require time, strategy, endurance, and sacrifices far greater than anyone had imagined. As night fell over the Vosges, the remaining French formations regrouped, lighting small lamps to count survivors, tend to the wounded, and prepare for the long march west. They knew what awaited them. Not rest, not relief, but the greatest order they would face in the entire First World War: stop the German advance on Paris. When French forces withdrew from Mulhouse at the end of August 20th, 1914, the first operation of Plan 17 officially collapsed. The most important industrial city in Upper Alsace fell back into German hands, and this time, there would be no opportunity to reclaim it. German troops marched into Mulhouse in perfect formation, their artillery supporting from the rear, infantry sweeping through intersections, restoring order within hours. The fall of Mulhouse was not merely a military defeat for France. It was the first unmistakable sign that the entire strategic mindset of the French army needed to be re-examined from the ground up. In the opening weeks of World War I, Mulhouse had been considered a secondary battlefield, but its significance as a reflection of the strength and organization of the two opposing military machines was enormous. The Germans demonstrated flawless coordination between artillery, infantry, cavalry, and rail transport, while the French found themselves constrained by a strategy that was too romantic and dangerously inflexible. What happened at Mulhouse was a miniature version of every strategic miscalculation France made in August 1914. After retaking the city, General von Heeringen immediately strengthened the entire defensive network. In Binz, Dornach, Lutherbach, and the surrounding areas, new bunkers were built. Barbed wire stretched across key avenues, and machine guns positioned at every vital point. Germany understood that the war would not end quickly, and they transformed Mulhouse into a fortress capable of resisting any future assault. Notably, they no longer needed to commit large forces here. By holding a firm defensive posture, they were free to redirect their main strength northward, where the decisive battles at Ardennes, Charleroi, and the outskirts of Paris were beginning to take shape. Meanwhile, the French retreat wound westward through the narrow valleys of the Vosges. The atmosphere in the ranks was heavy as lead. Units that had fought in Dornach and Cernay were now reduced to half strength. Entire battalions had to be merged just to field a viable fighting formation. Long columns of wounded men stretched along the mountain roads, many unable to walk on their own, carried by comrades through treacherous bends. French soldiers were exhausted physically and disheartened emotionally. The dream of liberating Alsace, a dream that had burned so brightly, had been extinguished almost overnight, and now they had to turn and face an enemy pouring down from the north like a steel flood. Still, one cannot say the French fought poorly at Mulhouse. On the contrary, they fought bravely under extremely unfavorable conditions. But courage cannot replace strategy, and France's greatest problem in August 1914 was strategy. Plan 17 placed far too much faith in offensive spirit and national pride, while ignoring practical factors such as terrain, logistics, German artillery superiority, and the brutal realities of modern warfare. Another key mistake was the dispersal of French forces. General Pau might have been able to retake Mulhouse, but he could not hold it, not with too few troops, too little heavy artillery, and no meaningful support from the rest of the French army. As soon as the Northern Front came under serious threat, the troops in Mulhouse became a sacrificial force to help save Paris. It was a brutal truth of war. Sometimes a battlefield must be abandoned to secure a greater objective. On August 21st and 22nd, German forces continued pursuing the retreating French. Skirmishes erupted along mountain paths throughout the Vosges. French units tried to maintain cohesion, firing when pressed, then withdrawing deeper toward safer ground. Morale, though damaged, was held together by General Pau's resolute speeches. He assured his soldiers that the fight for Alsace was not over. It was merely postponed because the enemy was striking at the heart of France. Strategically, the defeat at Mulhouse had far-reaching consequences. It revealed that the war would not unfold as the French had imagined. The romanticism of 19th-century military doctrine had died in the war's opening days. Maxim machine guns, German 77mm artillery, rail-borne mobility, and Germany's meticulous preparation reshaped the battlefield entirely. Mulhouse was the first warning of what modern war truly meant: speed, firepower, and the way entire campaigns could collapse because of a single misjudgment. The defeat also forced France's high command to revise its approach immediately. They were compelled to reassess troop deployment across all fronts and find ways to coordinate their corps more effectively. The war was no longer a contest of courage, but of organization, artillery strength, and the ability to adapt faster than the enemy. Yet despite the disappointment, one thing remained intact: the spirit of the French army. The troops who withdrew from Mulhouse did not flee in panic. They retreated in order, carrying with them a burning determination for revenge. They lost Mulhouse, but not France. And ahead of them, across the fields of the Marne, the battles to come would prove that their fighting spirit had not faded. As for the Germans, they did not celebrate long. Only days after Mulhouse fell for the final time, the German high command was confronted with a much larger challenge. The main offensive toward Paris was beginning to encounter stiff resistance from French and British forces. What happened at Mulhouse gave Germany a secure southern flank, but it also slowed their strategic tempo by a few days. And in the lightning war Germany aimed to wage, a few days could change history. Mulhouse closed its brief role in the opening days of World War I with tragic grandeur. The city changed hands 3 times in less than 2 weeks, witnessed the sacrifice of thousands on both sides, and became a symbol of France's first major strategic failure in the war. But it also marked the beginning of France's transformation, from romantic illusion to harsh realism, from overconfidence to heightened vigilance. When the last French formations finally withdrew fully into the Vosges basin, they understood one thing clearly: the true war had only just begun. And the defeat at Mulhouse would remain a painful but necessary lesson, one that would help them endure the far greater battles that lay ahead. The Battle of Mulhouse in 1914 closed as one of the most tragic and dramatic chapters of the opening phase of World War I. France marched into Alsace with the burning desire to reclaim its national honor. But the brutal reality of modern warfare crushed those romantic illusions, forcing them to retreat, wounded but unbroken. Mulhouse fell, yet the spirit of resistance, the will to survive, and the determination to defend the homeland forged a stronger French army for the far greater battles ahead, especially the Marne, where the fate of France would be rewritten. How do you feel about the Mulhouse campaign, one of France's first and most painful lessons of World War I? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more epic and vividly retold historic battles.